Welcome back to the Haven Homestead podcast, where we learn and grow together on our way to living more sustainable lives. I'm your host today. I'm Lindsay, and I'm standing in for Christopher. He's got a very full plate over at his new job there, and he's doing a great job, so I'm just giving him a little hand here on the homestead, helping with his podcast. Today's episode is episode number 52. I've titled it The 3 Phases of Food Economy, and we'll get into that here in just a minute. I'm not talking necessarily about the whole global food economy situation. I'm talking about how you use the food that comes into your pantry and goes across your table. This whole idea of food economy came from a conversation I had with my dad last summer. I'd been staying with them for an extended family vacation, and I had been cooking and meal planning, pretty much taking care of all of the food and the food waste and making sure we used our food leftovers. And he sat me down and he said, "Lindsay, you have to teach people how to do what you do with food." He says this whole food economy, using food economically, is a really good thing. Anyway, so this episode is kind of dedicated to him and that conversation that we had. I really appreciated it, and this is my first attempt at teaching folks about food economy. This episode is also a little bit of a break from the permaculture series that Chris has been doing. I'm kind of inserting myself here right in the middle of his permaculture series, but I think it fits in quite nicely. The 3 phases of food economy, which are meal planning, leftovers, and composting, each phase relates directly to a permaculture ethic. The 3 permaculture ethics, just for a quick reminder, are earth care, people care, and return of surplus. When it comes to earth care, using as much as possible, saving resources, and keeping waste out of landfills is all part of earth care. And when you practice a good, healthy food economy, you can do those things. When you're practicing people care through food economy, you're feeding your people good, wholesome food from the start. One of the things I like about this idea of food economy is that I have more time and I'm better able to cook things from scratch because I've already thought ahead about it. But we'll get into that here in just a minute. You also know what's in your food if you're cooking from scratch, and food economy all comes down to that. So with people care and food economy, you're feeding your people good, wholesome food from the start. Good, healthy food economy usually includes cooking from scratch, or at least it enables you to cook from scratch more often. And you know what's in your food, you know where it came from, you know where it's going. And that's all really taking care of the people as well. And the last ethic there, return of surplus. With food economy and return of surplus, we put our excess food waste back into our system by composting it, feeding the leftovers to chickens and worms and all that. So each phase of food economy relates directly to those permaculture ethics, and it's a really good way to see those permaculture ethics in action. So the first phase in having a healthy food economy is meal planning. Now, whether that goes as far as planning your garden and what meat stock to raise or not, thinking ahead about your meal sets you up and sets up your whole food system for success. Meal planning here, for me, when I think about meal planning, I mostly just think about picking out what we're going to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. That way I can plan ahead for my grocery runs. That way I can plan ahead and figure out what we're going to eat so that it's not a daily occurrence for me to stand in my pantry and think, what can I cook for dinner today? For me, whenever that happens, whenever I haven't picked out what meals we're going to have, I usually stand in my pantry a good half hour, 45 minutes before I figure out what I'm going to cook. And that pushes mealtime back, especially if I don't get to standing in front of my pantry until 5 o'clock at night when we're supposed to be eating. So if I can pick out what meals we're going to eat before, then when it comes to cooking and it's 5 o'clock and I've gotten busy and everything's going on and I'm about ready to pull my hair out because I've had such a long day, I don't have to stand in front of the pantry for 45 minutes. I can already get started cooking because I already know what we're going to eat. It really takes a lot of the stress out of meal times for me. I really love the phrase, prior proper planning prevents poor performance. I don't just love the alliteration, I also love the message behind that phrase. And I'm going to say it again. Prior proper planning prevents poor performance. Every time I forget to plan meals like this last week, I don't cook as well as when I have already planned and set apart the time and brain space to think about what I'm going to cook. My meals are more cohesive and less thrown together, and I have less meal mishaps when I've thought ahead about my cooking. Really, this prior proper planning sets you up for a proactive approach to life instead of a reactive one. And we all want to live a proactive life. When you're in control of what's happening to you as opposed to just acting on the things that are happening to you, you feel better about your life and you feel better about the things that you're doing, the choices that you're making. So meal planning really makes cooking from scratch convenient. And one of the reasons why we eat out is because it's convenient, because after a long day's effort at whatever we're doing, we're just tired and we don't want to think too much anymore. We want things to be already decided for us. So we go out and we eat. This week, when I didn't plan properly, we ate out 3 times. And I usually eat out that many times in a month. We did that in a week this week because I didn't plan properly. And the great thing about meal planning is that you've already got everything figured out. And most meals, even from scratch, come together in under an hour. It's the best part. So how do I do it? Meal planning here at Haven Homestead looks a little bit like this. On Sunday afternoon, I sit down and I plan the week. I pick a day, I picked Sunday, and I plan the whole next week from Monday through the next Sunday. And I look at all the appointments that we've got, all the responsibilities, things I need to clean or get ready for, activities that we have for church or school or anything else. And I put it down on my time blocking calendar. Then I plan the meals, every single meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, based on the kind of activities that are going on and the amount of activities that are going on. So really busy days when we get out of the house at 8 o'clock in the morning and might not get back until 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon or evening. Those days get really easy dinners that are thrown together quickly, or sometimes we even plan on eating dinner out. If I know for a fact that we're not going to have time, or we've got a meeting right at dinner time or something, then we plan on eating out. And that helps you with budgeting and all sorts of stuff too. But planning your meals on the same day every week, that's how we do it. That's how I do it. And that sitting down and planning also brings us to the second phase, which is leftovers. So maybe you have a big family and you never have leftovers, but for most folks, leftovers are kind of a fact of life. They happen to everyone. And after you spent a little time thinking ahead about which meals you're going to make for your family, you need to think a little bit further ahead and figure out what you're going to do with the things they didn't eat. I have a hard time using leftovers. I've always had a hard time with leftovers, and I've always felt disappointed at the amount of waste because there's always so much food, and the food doesn't get used, and then it gets moldy, and then you have to throw it away, and then your garbage stinks, and it's just not a pleasant experience for me. So I've always kind of had a negative view on leftovers. But once I started meal planning and planning for leftovers, and once we really got into living this permaculture lifestyle, I realized that reducing waste is kind of a pillar of being a permaculturist. I just made up that word, but it's a great one. So reducing waste is a really big part of living a permaculture life. And one of the ways that you can reduce waste is by using leftovers, or maybe making less food so that you don't have leftovers. I plan for and use leftovers in 3 different ways. The first way that we do that is that leftovers are my default lunch plan. When I sit down and I meal plan, almost all of my lunches are leftovers because almost all of my dinners produce leftovers. Now, there are some meals that I know don't produce leftovers. For example, if we're going to have a salad bar night, the next day for lunch, we probably won't have enough makings or fixings for lunch leftovers. But then I can plan ahead and I know what I'm going to make for lunch because I've got ramen on the shelf or I've got peanut butter and jelly sandwiches that we can make. But I planned for that ahead. I know what's going to make leftovers and I know how we're going to use it, and most of the time we use it for lunch. We also use leftovers for a quick and easy meal, which I usually plan on, but it's also a good way, a good thing for flexibility. Sometimes I've got a nice meal planned and then something comes up and I have no time to cook the thing that I planned, or I forgot to get something in the crock pot, so now we've got to throw something together last minute. Sometimes eating leftovers for those quick and easy backup meals is a really good idea. Now, the last way that I plan for and use leftovers is that I plan meals like pot roast that go into more than one meal. Pot roast, you cook a big roast, bigger than your family can eat in one night, and then you use it for the next 3 nights' dinners. So the first night you eat pot roast with mashed potatoes and peas, and the second night you take that pot roast and you make it into sandwiches. So you have pot roast sandwiches. And the third night you use the leftovers for a roast stew or something. But when you can plan ahead, if you make that roast on one night and then you use those leftovers for the next 3 nights, it helps you to save money and energy, and it's a really good way to plan your meals. Now, if you are like me and you get food bored, then I would encourage you to find ways to dress your leftovers up. For example, like I said before, roast becomes sandwiches and then soup. Stir fry can become a casserole. Throw some stir fry in with some potatoes and there you've got a casserole. But when you dress up your leftovers, they don't really taste like leftovers anymore. They taste like a whole new dish, and it's a good way to keep from getting food bored. We have very little food waste because of this, and because of our third phase, which is composting. We only get our garbage picked up once a month. And when I tell people that, they're always amazed by it. But when you think about it, it just makes sense. We don't produce a lot of garbage because we recycle, we burn things that can be burned, and we feed leftovers to our family. Once the leftovers are no longer fit for human consumption, we feed those leftovers to the worms and chickens and trees through composting it. It may be a little bit controversial. I've heard that if food is not fit for human consumption, it's no longer fit for chicken consumption as well. And that's a little bit true. You do need to be careful not to feed your chickens certain food items, and you do need to be careful that those food items aren't so moldy because chickens can get yeast infections. It's called impacted craw or sour craw. Both conditions are caused by feeding chickens foods that aren't good for them. But really, it's not practical to say if the food is not fit for humans, it's not fit for chickens. I use them as my food composters, and they do eat a lot of things that I wouldn't eat. So I am careful, though, when the food is too moldy even for the chickens. Sometimes we just take it out and feed it to the forest. Just dump it in a spot in the trees and nature will take care of the rest of that for us. This way, it's kept out of the garbage can, which keeps my garbage can smelling nice and fresh. And it also keeps the food out of the landfills. Less garbage in the landfills is just good for the planet. So just a quick overview. The 3 phases of food economy are this: meal planning, planning for and using leftovers, and compost. And if you can figure out a way to move your food through your home in an efficient manner where you can use every bit as much as possible, then you will have a healthy food economy. Everyone needs to figure out and establish a system that works best for their lifestyles. But using food in an economical way is something that everyone can do, and it can happen at any stage of the homesteading process. you just need to start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. I've got a lot of stories about food economy. One of my favorite stories comes from my Grammy June. Shortly after she passed away, I was calling family members and asking them to send me things that I could put together a little memory book for her. And my Aunt Karen, she sent me this recipe from her that was in her recipe book that she'd gotten from my Grammy. It was a pot roast recipe, and the recipe shared that you cook the roast on one day, and then the next day you use it for roast beef sandwiches, and then the next day you use it for something else. And it was a really neat thing for me to see how this food economy is kind of a timeless skill, time-honored skill that a lot of people have lost. When you have to buy food in bulk, when you buy half a cow, or when you buy roasts and things that are larger, it's more economical financially, but a lot of people don't realize how to use the food economically as well. And so that was something that I was impressed by, and I am trying constantly to strive to be more economical with our food. So anyways, when we have a healthy food economy, I know I feel better about the starving kids in Africa. As a kid, I remember hearing, "You've got to eat your peas. There's starving kids in Africa who would love to eat your peas." And I don't know how many of you have thought this, but I am sure I thought it, that I wish I could just stick my peas in an envelope and send it to the kids in Africa. But it's not really practical. But we can make sure we're not putting strain on food economy on a global scale by producing food that we can eat, by using the food that we do purchase and using every bit of it, and then returning that surplus to our gardens and stuff so that we can grow more food. And this has been something that I know that a lot of homesteaders try to do. And I just want to applaud everyone's efforts on trying to establish a healthy food economy. So let's keep doing it. And then we can all save money and time. This has been the Haven Homestead podcast. And if you really like the episode, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave us some comments. You can leave comments on YouTube at Haven Homestead, on Facebook at Haven Homestead 2009, on Instagram at The Haven Homestead, or on Twitter at Haven Homestead. You can listen to the episodes on Spreaker or YouTube, and we really appreciate knowing how you like to listen. So go ahead and leave us a comment there. If you liked what you heard enough to want to help support us financially, you can head on over to www.patreon.com/Haven Homestead, and you can support the show for as little as $1 a month. It really helps us to keep the podcast going, and your comments help us to keep the podcast relevant to you, so be sure to leave us some comments. This has been the Haven Homestead podcast. Thanks for listening.